Parables are always tricky business. They're hard to understand, although we often think we get them right away. But how can we know the point of a story that Jesus tells when we are more than 2,000 years removed from the context? How often do we take that into consideration? We might say that's not the case this morning, because this is a very familiar parable. We all know the point of the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? The man is injured and two upstanding folks pass him by, but without helping. But a third, a Samaritan, helps. Easy peasy, moral to the story, you see someone injured, help them. So what's so difficult? It's a pretty good message, but not all that challenging. And Jesus told his many parables to challenge the way we think, the way we construct our political realities, and also the way we act or fail to act. First of all, we call the parable the Good Samaritan. Jesus never said that. He just calls him a Samaritan, and for very good reason. There were no good Samaritans. Not in the time of Jesus, not according to faithful Jewish people. Amy Jo Levine, a contemporary Jewish biblical scholar, has done a lot to help us understand in a much deeper way what Jesus was up to in his parables. And for this one, she says, to Jesus' Jewish audience, as well as to Luke's readers, the idea of a good Samaritan would make no more sense than the idea of a good rapist or a good murderer. Levine says that a contemporary version of the parable would turn the Good Samaritan into the good Hamas member. And how hard would it be to hear that? There is another question that's important to this parable. Who do you relate to? Who do I relate to? Imagine yourself in Sunday school and the teacher asks, who would you like to be in this parable? Who's the one you want to be? And the hands shoot up because as kids we know who we're supposed to pick. And the answers ring out, the Good Samaritan. Not the Levite, not the priest. But would those listening to Jesus ever think of themselves as either of those, a Levite or a priest? Another biblical scholar, Brandon Scott, reminds us that Jesus is not speaking to the 1% of his society. So no one is identifying with the priest or the Levite, who are important in the community, and they are economically secure people. But they aren't identifying with the Samaritan either for the reasons I've already mentioned. There are no good Samaritans. What is Jesus up to? That leaves us with one other character in the story, the nameless guy who's lying in the ditch. Those who they would have identified with. The one who's beaten up and miserable and with no one to help. Those listening to Jesus would have known what that's like. And so he's the only character in the parable that they can identify with because they know what it's like. They know. And so, with that background, here comes the rub of the story. This poor guy lying in a ditch, eyes closed in pain, hears the sound of someone coming near and someone whispering comforting words to him. And he thinks to himself, at last, I'm saved. But then he opens his eyes. And who is standing over him? A damn Samaritan. His choice to accept his help is a life and death choice. And choosing life for him means changing his ideas about how things work and the capacity for good even in one's perceived enemy. And so it's mind-blowing. I imagine some of those around Jesus might have said, "Forget it. I would never take help from a Samaritan. There are no good Samaritans." Amy Jo Levine helps us again. Can we finally agree that it is better to acknowledge the humanity and the potential to do good in the enemy rather than to choose death? Will we be able to care for our enemies who are also our neighbors? Will we be able to bind up their wounds rather than blow up their cities? And can we imagine that they might do the same for us? The biblical text and concern for humanity's fate tell us that we must. Today, as 2,000 years ago, we have a clear sense of who our enemies are, don't we? At least we're being told who they are. Our federal government is telling us that among our enemies are the undocumented who have traveled from other lands to seek a better life and often refuge. Many are in the legal process of seeking asylum, and yet they are snatched out of courtrooms and imprisoned and then deported. Now you might be thinking to yourself, she's just strayed over from religion to politics. I think we are trained to draw a clear line between the two. But that's exactly the line that Jesus is blowing up today. That's the line he's asking us to reconsider. Seeing life and seeing events from a gospel point of view causes us to change our ideas on much of what we've been taught. Who is my neighbor? Anyone willing to help. Last week, Mexico sent teams of rescue and recovery workers to Texas in an act of neighborliness and kindness. Perhaps for some, it challenged our idea of who and what Mexico is. They are our neighbor. Who is my neighbor? Who is your neighbor? Anyone helping someone who is hurt, struggling, oppressed, or maligned, then you're helping your neighbor. Last week, our bishop, Matt Hyde, accompanied folks with a legal immigration status to court in downtown New York. And afterwards, he decried the fact that they were led away in handcuffs by masked police to be deported. Their due process curtailed abruptly. Oh, I've strayed that line again, haven't I? And our bishop is doing it for us and with us. Let us wade into the area of what the late John Lewis called good trouble. Good trouble for the sake of the gospel. My friends, we are loved by an ever generous and ever merciful God. And today we are the ones listening to Jesus answer our question, who is my neighbor? Because we are asking it or avoiding it in so many decisions of public policy. Think of those who will lose food assistance benefits and health care, especially the children. Who is my neighbor? Jesus' answer might be difficult to comprehend and act on, but the degree of difficulty doesn't make it less true. To be a Christian, what we profess to be, is to publicly follow Jesus wherever he leads us and with whom he calls us to advocate for and serve and simply accompany in life. The collect this morning, which I read at the altar, the collect simply is a prayer that collects our thoughts around the theme of the Sunday. It said this: "And grant that they may know and understand what things they ought to do, but also may have grace and power faithfully to accomplish them." May our God help us during these troubling times to know what we ought to do and give us the grace and the power as individuals, but also as communities, to accomplish them for our great good and for the good of all of our neighbors. Amen.